Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our general session track. Next up, we have our panel titled Executive Perspective, where AI is delivering value and where it isn't. Please join me in welcoming them to the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're going to have a wonderful conversation today about AI and a little bit more of a practical sense of how it's working in the wild. And today I'd like to sort of start off by introducing our panelists. First, I guess I'll start with myself and then we'll move on to other panelists. But my name is Chelico. I'm a physician and internist by training. I was a software developer, database engineer who went to medical school way back when, and really has been a career chief medical information officer for a number of large healthcare systems in and around New York. For the past couple of years, I've been at Bellevue Hospital and Health and Hospitals Corporation. As a CMIO, I was director of medical informatics at NYU Langone Medical Center for a little bit. And for the past 10 years, I've been at Northwell Health, both as a CMIO and for the last 5 years as the vice president and chief informatics and innovation officer for the health system, where we started the Center for Research Informatics and Innovation, where we pushed a lot of these AI and machine learning algorithms into practice in our health system. Actually, I will say that transitioning from Northwell Health to CommonSpirit Health as the system-wide Chief Medical Information Officer for the physician enterprise starting in March. So I'm looking forward to that as well, and continuing this wonderful journey on AI in healthcare and seeing how we can capitalize on all our electronic health record investments to make better insights of the data that we've collected. With that, I'd like to ask Stephen Wong to tell us a little bit about himself as well.
Thank you, John. Stephen here, and I have about 30 years experience in healthcare, both academia and also tech industry. I right now is the endowed chair at Houston Methodist, also the chair of the system medicine and bioengineering, and director of a couple other academic centers. And previously I was a professor at UCSF at Harvard. We did a lot of imaging and medical imaging and information large-scale implementation of both institutions, and also was a tech industry with HP, Bell Labs, Philips Healthcare, and also Chao on the side. And right now, we build I have a lot of experience building large-scale systems and also product in terms of the medical informatics product, all including PACS, which we coined the name PACS 30 years ago. It become an industrial standard right now. So right now I do a lot of AI stuff, both in terms of clinical predictions, robotic surgery, and also in drug discovery. Thank you.
Awesome. Ravi.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Ravi Prasad, and I'm with Novartis. And I had the global AI and data strategy and operations that includes management of their global enterprise data management solutions. I have been working in the AI space in multiple capacities for last 2 decades. And this includes both from leveraging AI from a cost efficiency perspective and also from generating value for creating new business models and new revenue generation. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity that AI actually brings to the healthcare value chain. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with you all and discussing this topic.
Awesome. Well, I will say, with that in mind, we'll kick it off with our first sort of topic. But as you guys can see from the rest of this conference, many folks are involved in healthcare, and people in healthcare are certainly talking about AI. Yet the number of models in production across healthcare companies varies widely. How prevalent is AI in healthcare in reality? I can speak about it from sort of representing the largest healthcare system in New York State, and now moving on to one of the largest healthcare providers in the United States, is that there are definitely some bright spots, and I think Stephen sort of is pushing the envelope in certain places, and I think drug discovery and radiology, I think, has proven its way. I think the crux of really bioinformatics, and I think the crux of the data that we're using in radiology to actually help and move along AI and machine learning algorithms into reality is definitely somewhere where we definitely see bright spots. I will say that in reality, you know, when as a frontline provider, as an internal medicine doc, as a hospitalist, you know, we don't see these things in the front lines as much as we do. If we do, maybe we're seeing them in disguise or they're not being presented as such. But there is a little bit of a skepticism. And I think, you know, we'll get into it a little bit further why that is. But I will say that there are sort of, you know, AI algorithms understanding where it is in Northwell, where we're using it to predict mortality. We're using it to understand, you know, if patients are in the right care setting, understanding, you know, early warning scoring systems within a healthcare system. But we haven't really seen this in the forefront and really partaking in decision making, whether it's around diagnosis or treatment of patients. And you know, I'll leave it to our other panelists to see if what they think. Stephen, let me know where you see how prevalent AI is in healthcare.
I agree with you. We kind of in the early days of understand AI and its full potential in healthcare. Definitely, if you survey all the CEO, CIO, CTO, whatever, they believe that is the way to go. And the reason you don't see too much in internal medicine, probably a lot of them are embedded in the system, so you don't see it. The best AI is embedded, not visible. And when AI, I take a more broader view than more than machine learning, including inference system, expert system, NLP. A lot of them actually being implemented in mostly, I would say in a low-hanging fruit area, like repetitive tasks, administrative tasks. Those things take out a lot of doctors and nurses' time. And that's the part that we try to do this kind of AI, improving mechanistic automation. So physician more time to the patient instead of doing data entry. I think this is the area. The other area, I mentioned earlier, the second wave right now, second phase coming up is the one focused on radiology, pathology, even ophthalmologists. And these are the areas that you have a lot of image recognition, you know, diagnostic, and very suitable for machine learning, deep learning type of approaches. And that area, I think, is much faster than people think. Express-rate data is available. Coming up, we are also, I can see even go a step further about the e-triage and diagnostic going forward. And in fact, automate the workflow, cognitive automation. When people talk about robotic process automation in industry now, people talk about cognitive automations. I think it is possible in medicine, but not too much replacing human physician, but really take off a lot of their time so they can spend more time with the patient solving disease problem instead of tied up by this protocol procedure, which still require a lot of cognitive power. I think that's an exciting area. I think it's prevalent. Mostly, as summary, I think I see a lot of them is in the back office area. A lot of them are doing that already. And going forward, I hope to see more in the front end, as you say, facing the patients more. I think it's going, that is more complicated because of the regulatory issues.
Totally understand. Ravi, I know there's definitely AI in pharma, and a lot of the drugs we have today are because of some machine learning and AI. Let us know how things are at Novartis.
Sure, John. Actually, Stephen actually mentioned some really interesting viewpoints there on the evolution of AI and getting into the second phase. So if you really look at this evolution, perhaps we are more in the augmented intelligence phase rather than a pure artificial intelligence phase. So it really is helping the doctors and the patients with the right intelligence of modeling and algorithms. So certain areas where AI is really playing a great role is like consumer health. So where you have like cardiometabolic sensors and collecting the data and the analytics that you run on it, or even in the drug discovery phase, we use a lot of AI. within our organization. And the same thing on the supply chain and manufacturing side, which is kind of a proven model in the other industries, is being applied within within the pharma and life sciences side of the world. I guess the biggest opportunity of application of AI is more in truly understanding the patients and having that segmentation of one on the patient side, and then really driving that patient and the healthcare providers' experiences, leveraging the AI and the insights that can be derived from the robust data that you collect on almost a real stream basis. So yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity out there. There are certain spotty areas where AI has really matured itself, and then there are other areas where there's a lot more work to be done, especially where there is a significant amount of what I call as a human intelligence is required, and where general AI cannot be applied in a more, but it's rather being more in a specific way. So that's where I see that happening. Actually, that kind of brings us to a really interesting topic of, now that we discussed about this particular situation, Stephen, I mean, what are your thoughts on perhaps going to the next question there?
Well, it's a good segue, Ravi. Perfect. So the second question is really about some story about successful and unsuccessful use cases in AI, right? I mean, you already mentioned some success, right, John and Ravi mentioned a lot of success in. They do have, we know that they're very costly unsuccessful stories. I don't mention by a lot of company. I think a lot of unsuccessful story is too aggressive. They have not defined the problem clearly and jump in. I think, or maybe marketing people overpromise, such that the technical people is not enough time to deliver. I think that happens a lot of time because we're shareholder value, right? Every quarter you need to show results. So there's a difficulty for them. So we know there are a couple of huge, big, bad publicity about AI failed. And even our next door neighbor, MD Anderson, have a big project, failed a couple of years ago. I think they spent about, it's on the news, $60 million for nothing. All right. So, but I just think I'm optimistic. I think we start seeing, instead of such a huge way to going in, for example, in here, we have a lot of speech recognition and automated reporting during surgery, right? Surgeon doing operation, just talk to the machine and generate report. I mean, this is really let the surgeon focused on the surgery instead of trying to dictate, key in something and then go back to surgery. These are the embedded AI into workflow. They become very successful. In fact, people didn't pay much attention. If you look at the robotic surgery, a lot of machinery, they have a lot of sophisticated computer vision algorithms into it already. And in fact, sometimes precision is better than human can control. And John mentioned about radiology. In fact, pathology, digital pathology on the rage right now. Probably think pathology probably is a new frontier in terms of digital pathology. In the past, we worry about this, the storage is too costly, who will pay for the scanner, all these things. But Stone Category actually proving that you can make money out of it. They scan a whole bunch of the image as pathology image and sell it to pharma, get into trouble. There's another story we're talking about. But there's a lot of opportunity there. So these are all successful stories. One thing I like to follow with Ravi things, these cell health options, how to remote monitoring of the heart rate, blood sugar, sleep tracking, all these things. These already have AI component in it already, right, today. Right? Very sophisticated AI. We didn't pay attention. Very perfect for clinical trial in pharma, especially when you want to stratify the patients. Find out what certain patient suitable for this. Right now, a lot traditional way of doing pharma is we recruit tens of thousands of patients and then get a whole bunch of data, spend a whole bunch of money, many years, and a whole bunch of statisticians at the end try to sort out what it is, right? I mean, we should push this statistical upfront in the patient recruitment. And now with this AI, IoT, all kind of thing, helps a lot, right? I think this is, I would think they were changing the pharma thinking about doing clinical trial.
I I agree with you on that, Stephen. That's a fantastic point. Actually, you hit on a very interesting use case there, which almost every life sciences pharma company faces, is the cycle time, right? I mean, the amount of time it takes for the whole drug development. I mean, if you look at the industry average, it's somewhere around 8 to 10 years, and a significant amount of investment goes into it. So a great use case where AI can significantly enhance value, and perhaps the companies like Moderna have actually proven that, is by introducing the true power of AI to reduce that cycle time. Like every year reduction in cycle time increases your market value by huge percentage. And not only that, it also helps the patients with getting the drug much more faster. So along with the cycle time, the other area where AI can really help, again, with recruitment of the right patients and with the right scenarios, is with what we call as a success rate, right? So, I mean, how do we increase the success rate between these various phases of trials? And those are, I would say, some of the really interesting use cases where AI can be a great value add, and as something pretty much all life sciences pharma industries are working on.
Oh, Ravi, I think that is totally true, because I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the work, trying to identify patient populations or cohorts for pharma within the sort of the context of the 10 million patients we have in our databases. Identifying those patients even early on, before feasibility, and really helping design clinical trials is definitely sort of prompting for success. And I think that in pharma and drug discovery, and truly, I mean, if you really get before that in bioinformatics and understanding biomarker identification and other things, those are all places where there's so much data that it's impossible for a human to sort of find those bright spots or find those connections. So I think that is really ability. I will tell a story really at the front lines, and this may not be entirely like AI, but like augmented data analysis. But I think we use AI or at least more sophisticated data analysis to develop scoring systems within healthcare, where we take a myriad of data points that we normally would collect: heart rate, vital sign, respiratory rate, BMI, age, and we identify sort of mortality for a patient while they're in the hospital, and we present this to the providers up front in the EHR, and we actually have some protocols around it. So we call it the modified early warning scoring system, and it's something that we introduced a little while back in our healthcare system. It's been sort of almost 4, maybe 5, 6 years. But there's, the real truth of it is in practice, it hasn't really kind of played out, and I'll get into that a little bit further. But based upon those things, we can actually develop a score looking at retrospective data, and say if your score is at a 7, we can say your mortality is close to 5% during your hospitalization. At a score of 8, we can actually, think your mortality is getting closer to 10, 15. At a score of 9, maybe 20, 25%, and a score of 10, maybe 30. And with that, at a score of 7, we ask the nurses to start looking at the patients a little bit more carefully, taking vital signs every 2 hours. At a score of 8, we actually ask the licensed provider to come at the bedside. At a score of 9, we ask the rapid response team to come, and a score of 10, we even get an ICU consult. And these things have sort of guided care, but there is still certain pitfalls. And I think this goes back to Stephen's point, is that these are manually collected data points. And I think one of the things is that we don't collect the data often enough, and sometimes we know that the patient is sick before we actually collect the data point, and then the computer tells us the patient's sick, which is for those of us in the front line saying, thank you very much, you're wasting my time. But at the same time, there's patients that get sick that the scoring algorithm doesn't work for, or didn't sort of trigger. And I think these are some of the realities of how we've seen these algorithms sort of play out. And these are not really sophisticated, nor really are they real machine learning, but they're using a number of data points to actually put together data and present it in such a way. And I think the truth of the matter is that there's so much data that's being thrown to our providers, to our nurses, at all different levels. And the more we get into sort of consumer wearables, the more we get into other things, if we can get, some of the mundane away, or we can sort of identify those easy, low-hanging fruit, like Stephen was saying earlier, I think then we can sort of leave the professionals for the more intricate and the more higher level thinking. I think I've always seen decision support in healthcare not to replace the physician or replace the nurse. I think it's something to sort of, augment their current situation. And I think, if you practiced medicine 30 years ago, there wasn't that many diagnoses or that many treatment options. Now we're faced with thousands of opportunities for different diagnosis and overlapping diagnosis. We have so many different treatment options, surgical, drug treatment options and other treatment options, that I think providers need all the help they can get to actually go through the data, go through the literature, go through an understanding. So there's definitely a place for this. I think it really comes down to it, to really where it is and how we can sort of look at outcomes in healthcare. And with that in mind, I think our next question would sort of fit that topic very well.
John, I think you're so right. Pretty much answered the next question here on what a perfect example could be where the impact of AI can enhance the outcomes of healthcare settings. The one area which I can think about is with the adherence to prescription medication. So that's a really interesting area where patients tend to start with certain medication, and then after couple of rounds, the renewal rates start dropping, and then eventually the effectiveness of the medication starts weaning away. So that's another area where AI can really bring. That's a good example of where AI can really bring huge value of looking at the patient population, looking at the behavior of actually adherence levels, and then find the right ways and methods to engage and drive that nudges with the patients so that they continue to be adhering to the prescription medication. So I kind of look at that as a good example, of course, in addition to all the great examples that you have shared on the data-driven approaches.
Yeah, quite interesting. I think there's so many ways AI can impact healthcare. I'm an opportunist and also optimist. And this is really rely on if we really have a good digitization infrastructure. Then a lot of things, imagination you can think about. I can think of right now, I think a lot of Lowell or Houston Methodist, we do a lot of things to identify risk factor, predict readmission, home care, self-care, all these things. And even for, say, the hospital bed management, for example, optimization, utilization of equipment, operation room surgery, all these things. In fact, more or less they have AI vendor come to us say, we have this to try it out, right? Because right sudden all this information become available. But I think, as I say, we are in the tip of iceberg, and a lot of opportunity. We are actually experimenting something, a virtual doctor platform. Not to try to replace you, John, but just a clone you, a digital twin, such that to do a lifeline with AI engine in the back, talking to patients. You have a right time of speech recognitions, all kind of procedure. Basically, you want to automate the workflow as much as possible, especially the mundane part of it, until the final decision. So we've done something on the stroke, for example, triage a stroke and imaging and all kind of things before we finally come to the score to hit the patient. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think it's up to imagination. We're just starting. I would imagine later on people come out something very crazy, but very, very crazy yet very meaningful that we cannot imagine in the past.
No, it is very true. I mean, I think this sort of augmented world that we're getting into is that, if a radiologist can, look at an image and all the mundane things of the measurements and the identification of things, or maybe areas that they need to focus on can sort of be brought in front of them, and then the decisions can be made or dictation can be made in radiology or pathology or whatever else. I think all of those things that sort of, if a radiologist now can read, spend more time on the more important factors within an image, or a pathologist can find more understanding of the places that they should focus or whatever else. I think it does sort of again help with the workflow, help with sort of focusing on the higher the higher level knowledge or insight that they need to gain from it. But again, there's repetitive tasks within all of those things that can sort of be analyzed and sort of be disrupted by AI or augmented data analysis and things like that. And but I will sort of and with that, maybe even like talk a little bit about our next topic, which is really some of the inconvenient truths about AI and healthcare. I will say Stephen touched upon it a little bit, is that we are at the tip of the iceberg, and I think there's a reason for that. And I think how we could just sort of how do we get to the next sort of level. And I think the reality that I see in my world, especially working with electronic health record data, wearing with continuous monitoring and wearables and things like that, is the level and the quality of the data that we have is not to the point where we need it for AI and AI algorithms. I think you can give my machine learning experts in our health and in health systems any data set, and they can provide insights. But if the data set is really error prone, or it's not describing the current situation, or it's not describing the current situation in the reality in the front lines, there may be data points that are missing, or it's not clean, or maybe it's not captured in the structured chart, it's captured in the unstructured chart, where we need to use more natural language processing, and these things are not 100%. I think that's where the inconvenient truth is in healthcare, is that the data is dirty, and this whole adage of garbage in, garbage out is really where it is. And I think this proved itself very well when we looked at COVID and this past the 2-3 years of this pandemic, is that we have large data sets. We've had some real truths about large companies that have come forward to help with this effort. But in the end, there's been sort of a flop in that the data collection and the data that we have, it doesn't really sort of translate into the front lines. And the data has changed so much. Maybe the disease has changed or progressed so much that there was some early discoveries or early AI or algorithms that look promising, but the reality is this thing evolved. Those things had to go. You had to go back and modify those algorithms and modify the data that they were based upon. So some of the inconvenient truth is the data in electronic health records and the data, the way it's collected in a pandemic, is that we weren't collecting data to the best of our ability. We were taking care of patients at the front line. So we had a survival metric that we created around identifying patient survival during COVID when they were hospitalized. And I think it did show much promise, but at the same time, it was met with some skepticism. And truth be told, it should have. And I think that's where we are stuck right now, in that this iceberg needs to get to the next level. But we need to, again, digitize the pathology, digitize the radiology, which we have, but also really clean up the data that we're collecting and how we're collecting it. The data that's collected from a wearable that you wear on your wrist is not sort of scrutinized the same way that of a cardiac monitor I use in the ICU. So those are things that we need to put into context, and how we really look at the things, and even data that were collected from 2 different hospitals or 2 different outpatient care settings are very hard to compare, because they were collected by very different groups of people or trained differently at certain different points. So these are the realities, and I think it's not AI that's failing; it's the fact that we're giving our AI people not the best data. And I think we spent a lot of time cleaning it up, and we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
I see a lot of things that can resonate a lot on the problem we are facing here. It's really about the quality. So I guess going forward, they will create some sort of data governance or across different things to try to solve it by impose certain standard. That's one way to do it. Interoperability is always a perpetual issue. And remember, EMR, I hate to say that, it's really a glorified billing system, okay? It's not research. So beside the poor dirty data, it's also become missing a lot of data. That's why I think about this automated imaging sensor, all these things, automatic collection. would be a godsend if they do it well in automatic implement into the system. So, and the bias also, we touch on the data itself, but actually we thought algorithm itself, even you have a perfect validated algorithm day one, after half a year, I bet it may not work very well. When you change, we constantly changing procedures, changing drug protocol, changing even sometimes demographic. And I think a hospital need to create some sort of SOP, additional work for IT people to kind of recertify this algorithm from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now we just leave it there, let it run. But remember, we're making once it's validated, we trust them. Just like we trust a lot of index today, they're causing a lot of problem because the index in the past, they will do years, decades of clinical trial, and we don't have effort to redo it again. And we see a lot of issue of, take a case of cancer screening. We have a lot of over biopsy, over diagnosis cancer screening. We know that, right? If you look at BioRef4, 75% of BioRef4 are false positive. That's ridiculous as a standard, but we're using it, right? So I think the SOP for the AI algorithm, I think the IT organization should start thinking about it. I think it's very important. And the other thing is, to be fair, I mean, look, I just lost a person to Novartis. Hospital cannot afford to pay as you guys pay them. Let's be frank. I lost another one to Amazon or something, whoever. But my point is, the tech company coming in big time in healthcare, they start sucking up a lot of people working in healthcare area. So, you know, the competitive, instead of salary to compete with the tech industry is difficult. Of course, people, I tend to think people work in healthcare normally, not here just for money, because it's a mission. That's the reason we're passionate about it at a lower cost. But when the price is 2 or 3 times difference, it's a huge difference. So yeah. Go ahead.
I echo Stephen's point. I mean, it's not just people, but it's the cost for infrastructure. And I mean, there are healthcare systems that make, you know, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars. However, the margins in healthcare are very slim. And I think those are that's some of the problem is that, you know, not that healthcare doesn't want to invest in these things. It just, there's not much sort of margin to sort of invest on the healthcare provider side, but that's some piece to kind of look at. But Ravi, interesting to really kind of understand your inconvenient truths about AI and from your perspective.
Now, I guess actually both you and Stephen have covered a lot of this from an quality perspective, bias perspective, and then, you know, how you know, the data can be a huge hurdle here. I think the one other element which plays a significant role in the healthcare value chain is regulations. So there's a lot of regulations you need to deal with across, you know, from managing and dealing with the patient data to how do you incorporate the real world evidence data into your value chain, and of course, you know, all the various kind of insights that you generate, or how much of these are ethical from an ethics perspective, right? So I think those are, I would say that's one additional element I would add.
Yeah, the regulation, policy, liability, who owns the data, who can use it, you know, who is responsible for it. I think for the medical device size, we are much better. But in terms of AI algorithm, I think we kind of place it in between software and medical device. I think FDA sooner or later have to figure out. I think this current way seems like it lean toward AI as a medical device. If that's the case, there's a lot of regulations going on, and even harder to implement.
You know, I welcome that. At the same time, I'm very scared of that, and the fact that, you know, I think that it kind of will stifle innovation, getting things to sort of the front lines quick enough. But you know, I think having a proper randomized controlled trial or holding an AI algorithm that's going to make some clinical decisions to the same level of scrutiny as a drug is something that it does make sense at the heart of it. But at the same time, I'm scared in the fact that overregulation may actually lead to, you know, stifling some of the progress. But at the same time, I guess we'll see how it is. But you know, it is the fact that if we're using the data in EHRs, is the EHRs are collecting data to drop a bill. And if that's the goal, that's the goal of an EHR at the heart of it. We're trying to sort of put clinical care and interpret it for that reason. And it's interesting because I was reading something from many of the big tech leaders that collected data during COVID. But they collected the data because their mindset about the collection of data was really around marketing and how they could help their ad tech and their ad tech business sort of progress more than it would actually the healthcare. So the data we collect in healthcare compared to sort of someone data that's collected by a big tech firm that's using their ad tech sort of databases or data points, it is hard to sort of put those two things together. So I think those are some things to really kind of keep in mind, is that the ultimate goal of how you're collecting data may actually, when you're looking back at retrospectively at the data, may actually change your interpretation significantly. And that's something to really think about.
But John, you touch on the right perfect into the next question. I supposed to say, this is about this really privacy, ethical, all kind of nature of the AI model become getting a lot of attention. We don't know what to do with it and what are the responsible AI player in the healthcare, all this area. I think we are starting getting better, but I do afraid that you're right. And we may get to a stage over-regulated, at least not in the beginning when the industry just thriving, right? You put a lot of regulation policy. But then again, it's ethical issue, right? We have some moral issue. It's a human life here we are dealing with. And so I think there are many, digitization is a good thing, but sometimes it can be bad thing, right? Digitization, sometimes it means the data easy to copy and move around. And to protect the privacy even harder. And a lot of time is, no matter how good is your privacy protection, cyber security, no organization can protect themselves from their internal employees. Yep. Right? Someone send you some phishing email, I read, I still believe, click on it, you let the people in, right? This is really a process issue. An organization as complex as Knight Lawwell, you're a huge organization. I'm sure a lot of people come in and out, all kinds of people. Some of them are private group, or some of them are your own employee. Very hard to uniformly enforce them. This is more than a technology issue. I think it's the issue of management and process need to be in place. But at the same time, I'm afraid it's overly protective. Now administration say, okay, I cut everything off, everything central, no one can touch it. And at the same time, you just discourage any invention. This is a dilemma situation we are facing. I'm sure in your organization, our organization also, right? At least, in medicine, you say do no harm, so we don't do anything, no harm. But in a way, we are stopping progress. We are not pushing the envelope.
I agree, and I think, to even look at these data sets, sometimes we try to de-identify our patients or use these data sets we share we would love to share our data with pharmaceutical companies or industry's partners and other things to sort of help the progress, because I think industry partnership is very important. But at the same time, this data belongs to healthcare systems and it really belongs to the patients. Is that, do we have to sort of have consent the same way we have consent for a drug or a consent for a clinical trial? But most healthcare systems are not set up to sort of consent patients up front to use their data for these things, and that way you have to keep the data de-identified, and sometimes that process of de-identification really changes the data itself, and I think that's something we need to kind of keep in mind. Ravi, I'm sure you guys are plagued by some of these ethical and privacy issues in industry as well. Though we did say you have a little bit more resources, but you're but have the same problems.
More resources come with more problems. So, yeah. So if you look at responsible AI by itself, I mean, this is an interesting topic within healthcare, because a very similar situation happened in the financial services space. When the 2010 crash happened, and then there were regulations and policies in place to manage this situation of the right ethical and responsible AI. There are two parts to this. One is how well are your models behaving and performing based on the data that's going in? And number two is how well, what are the kind of outcomes that these are generating, and the outcomes are either biased or unbiased. So when I say, you know, how well the models are behaving, this is about how are these codes written? Are they being, you know, the developers, are they leveraging the right ethical standards to actually write those codes and the algorithms? Similarly, you know, if the insights that are being generated are being applied effectively and in the right unbiased manner with the patients and the patient data. There's another interesting element which comes to this. A responsible AI comes with a responsible data, because you can only build so much amount of algorithms and AI models on the right kind of data and the unbiased data. By default, it's almost impossible to have 100% unbiased data. There'll be always certain biases. So having the right policies and the procedures in place to ensure, and the governance in place, so that, you know, you have the right ethical structures built in, and the organization built in to ensure that the tiering of the issues is happening at the right level, and you are basically able to manage these without they getting out of control. The biggest challenge that you see, especially with this kind of responsible AI and responsible data situation, is less about not a direct financial impact, but more of a reputational impact, which eventually leads to a huge financial impact. So yeah, I mean, we take care of the responsible and ethical AI piece with a huge amount of due diligence.
Actually, I'd like to follow up a question. Actually, I worry about abuse. We are trusting the hospital itself will not abuse the model, the AI information they got. And for respectable hospital, of course, important, because this is a trust business. But it's hard to say sometimes for some hospital, they may take a risk, right? It's a lot of pressure, or it's a business end of the day. And is there a way, something that to kind of look over the shoulders of the hospital, these AI models, make sure they're not being abused for their benefit?
Yeah,
I have a question.
I would take that in the sense that, like, you know, make sure that the model is used in the situation it was built for, and not taken out of context. You know, if you're trying to do sort of an exercise of predicting mortality, or an exercise of bed management, or anything sort of even more mundane around, you know, even trying to, you know, get the proper billing for what you have in your, you know, coded in your charts, I would say that, you know, if it's done in a large academic medical center and data is sort of gathered from there, then, you know, taking that and putting that in a small rural community hospital may actually not translate very well. It may be built for only one situation. And I think that's something that you really kind of think about, is that, you know, as I transition from Northwell, which is, you know, all in downstate New York, to sort of CommonSpirit Health, which is all across, you know, in 21 states across the entire United States. Every market, every pocket acts differently, I'm sure, and collects data differently, I'm sure. So that's something you really need to get in context when you're looking at your data. And I think that's something that I will sort of, you know, better understand in my future role. But I think, you know, these algorithms can only be used for a specific use case, the same way a drug only has things that are the label is made for. You know, and I think maybe from a regulatory perspective, you need sort of, this is a label that says this is used for this situation. Or maybe there needs to be sort of a checklist to say, this can't go live in production and touch patient care until these checkboxes were checked. And, or maybe it needs to be, you know, the data needs to be refreshed and the algorithm needs to be checked every month or every 2 months, or whatever we feel is most important. But these are things that I think maybe are just common sense in AI, but some things it's hard for us to kind of continuously go back and do, because it's hard to do it the first time, and to keep doing it maybe even harder. So just to put that in context. But I totally agree with what both of you guys are saying in that context. But
So that's a great point, John. And then we have discussed so many topics today. From going from the value to the inconvenient truth to the use cases, examples, responsible. Let's bring this back to the basics here. And with the next question, we'll look at how organizations can actually should set themselves up for on the speed of AI, and what would be the first step to get onto this journey. So, John, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo some of what I said earlier. I mean, the first thing the organization can do is really get their data in order and get their ducks in order, make sure that they have good quality data to provide good outcomes and good insights from AI algorithms and proper use of analytics. I think that needs to be sort of put in context and understanding. I think that I think really even brings to a point where when we're developing the tools by which we collect the data, whether it's an electronic health record system or in PACS or in digital pathology, they need to be built in order to collect the data in a way that is useful and doesn't leave room for interpretation by these systems and by the data analysis and machine learning algorithms and things like that. So what you can do now is get your house in order, get your data in order, and really look at, as you develop new tools and new data collection elements or systems or devices for that matter, they need to keep in mind the ultimate goal. Yes, it's to take care of patients as primary goal, but the secondary uses of this data for analytics and machine learning and retrospective analysis will lend itself, would significantly improve the use of the data for AI and machine learning algorithms in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is data is absolutely important. Garbage in, garbage out. Your data is bad, no matter how good it is. I want to add a couple more before data. I think just like every project in hospital, I think the most important is define the problem and needs clearly before embedding any AI project. Get the leadership buy-in, make sure the client, consumer, clinician agree, educate them, and all these is important because I saw quite a number of AI projects fail across different health system or colleagues. Sometimes they call me up, well, Steve, how do I solve this problem? I say, too late, man. You should talk to your boss or talk to your leadership ahead of time. Make sure you secure your funding or support before you do it. And some of them, they do it halfway. They cut off the no funding because the leadership don't buy in. They thought it waste of money, right? Some of the time you take we in healthcare system, a lot of us took the initiative. We get started without considering the problem needs of the organization clearly. Would they fit into their strategy? So I think a lot of AI fail is really a good old project management. It's no different. I think define the problem and needs and the scope, because once you define the scope of the problem, you know how much it costs, you know who will be the champion you should persuade, who are the funding and how to track it. I see a lot of failing is not because of the technology, it's missing this component. That's my experience in recent. Yeah.
Totally, totally makes sense. I mean, I think I think there also needs to be sort of an eye towards the right resources that are to put into these things. They're not just research projects anymore if they're really kind of be implemented properly. And having sort of, executive support to sort of continue the project from start to finish is somewhat of these things. They're not sort of, stuck in a lab and I think the idea is to really, have the proper garner the proper support, and because it's the actions that are, you probably provide insight, but if you can't have leadership sort of guide the actions that need to kind of be done with this data, then it's a flop. The intervention sort of breaks down. So I think that's something to really think about in that context, for sure.
No, great points there, John and Stephen. I kind of break it down into as first steps into 3 parts. just to make it simple, and you have covered these in a very eloquent way. The first one is, what is the business problem that we are actually trying to solve with this AI program, right? I mean, even before you launch something, let's be very clear on where the true value can be created by introducing a program like this. The second one is, of course, working on the right strategy, framework, having an execution plan, talent, things like those, are very important. And the third one, and perhaps the most important one, is, do we have a buy-in? Do we have a buy-in at the leadership level, at the executive level, at the board level? Because very soon this can become a flash in the pan kind of a situation before, because you'll run into a lot of what I call as early stage potential failures before you start seeing some success stories. So it's important that there is persistent support coming from the leadership.
Yeah. One more thing I'd like to add, small thing, is the maturization of the organization. For example, you make sure the ITs have enough technology, understanding of technology to able to support, sustain the AI models into the clinical operation. I see a lot of time difficult because traditional IT is really centralized. We want to do everything standard. I don't want to deal with one-off solution. Suddenly show them one-off solution, and they are not really happy about it. and really, they always stress out. I mean, today between EMR, IT, telemedicine, all they already have enough stress, and whether the organization, technical organization, part of the IT, whatever, they can sustain the AI effort is very important. Need to negotiate upfront. You really understand whether they can do it or not. If not, sooner or later you will drop your ball.
Yep. No, it's funny because the interfaces that we have to present the data to our providers or our frontline staff or even our frontline clerical staff are very old legacy systems that sort of are reluctant to sort of integrate some of this external tools or data into that front end, whether it's your electronic health record system or your registration system, or even a lot of the patient portal environments that we have. Oftentimes, like we're stuck with those legacy old systems that don't allow us to sort of integrate to get data out properly and to bring data back. And I think there's speak of smart on fire and being able to use that to interface with our electronic health record systems. But the reality is that there's no real highway back to bring data back to the EHR and present it appropriately without sort of having a pop-up or some other way. There's definitely some work to be done on those places, and I think that's definitely something that needs more work, 100%. And with that in mind, maybe we'll move to the last question we have of the day, and maybe we'll save some time to sum things up. But what do we all see as absolute cutting edge, and what do you expect to see in when it comes to AI in healthcare over the next 5 years? I sum it up like anyone else when I present these nifty little things to our providers in our healthcare systems, is that we develop these dashboards, we develop these tools, we develop these wonderful algorithms. But if the computer is telling you something you already know, or something it's often seen as something as a waste of time, like or really another thing that I have to worry about. And I think oftentimes the cutting edge and what you expect out of these systems is that I think one of my senior providers says, well, that's great, you just developed a wonderful decision support tool for this clinical situation, but tell me what I don't know. Tell me what is going to be helpful in this situation. Tell me what I don't know for patients that look or come in front of me in this particular situation in the past 6 months, a year, or whatever the case may be. So it's tell me what I don't know is really going to be cutting edge. Don't tell me that I don't need to know the patient's blood pressure or heart rate every second of the day from their Apple Watch. But what I do need to know is when it's a problem, or tell me things that when I do need to know, when I need to act on it. Those are the things where I think we need to sort of get to the point where is again, tell me what I don't know, and tell me when the data is important. What I see in my perspective. Ravi, what's your thoughts?
No, I think that's definitely a very important thing. Like, especially the way we look at it is what is that biomarker which has not yet been invented or identified, right, for a disease that's not known yet. So those are the kind of really interesting questions that come up. The other area is the AI-based drug discovery process. You know, can you go and leverage AI to find the right molecule? You know, which usually takes so much amount of effort. So there are some really interesting use cases. Again, as you said, John, there are what is it that you don't know and that doesn't exist today? By leveraging data and artificial intelligence, you can start looking at those newer insights.
I agree what both John and Rafi say. What I like to add a couple of things is, I think one thing is being tongue-in-cheek. I think AI sooner or later replace a lot of doctors' work. I hope they can, really, because physicians right now spend a lot of time administration, doing all kind of data entry, doing a lot of mundane work. Those things can be done by machine. Your time should be spent more with the patients. Think about more cases, build up the relationship, building trust. That's why patients come to hospital. Patient doesn't want to talk to a robot. They want to talk to you. But you spend most of the time doing keying the data, trying to find the information. I think the AI should at least really help the physician get rid of this mundane work. And I think it's happening. Right now, I can see a lot embedded AI into medical device, in clinical workflow, surgery, and all kind of thing, and even triage. You can see a lot of e-triage coming along. And diagnostic is already, radiology making a lot of headway, pathology making a lot of headway. All these coming along. The other area is AI make possible changing how healthcare will be delivered, in a sense that you will see more home care. Hospital without walls. You don't really have to come to hospital when you see a doctor. And maybe a lot of AI self-help, self-care initially before it, right? In the past, when I have a problem, I go to see my doctor, right? You don't have to, right? You have some sort of intelligent, trustable sources. You can figure out what's wrong with you first, and then figure out where you could go to see a doctor or not, or even you can avoid seeing a physician. Or the other way is, for example, people in stroke, right? People go stroke, go to the, sometimes a lot of patients, the problem, time is bringing stroke. So a lot of time you route it in the wrong medical center, you're dead, right? So during the ambulance, if you have some sort of app, just scan this guy, are you have a stroke or not? Okay, you got a stroke, send it to the stroke center instead of sending it to the emergency room. Things like that, I think AI will change the practice, how healthcare delivered. I think I'm very positive about it. Yeah.
No, it's true. I think I try to. One thing I know in healthcare that will and maybe change is that we're getting to a place where we're getting value or pay for performance or value-based care. I think currently we get paid and we're incentivized for widgets and for fee-for-service work. And I think taking care of the patient at home, taking care of them when they're not in front of us, taking care of them and understanding their consumer wearables and all of that, all of a sudden, then there's incentives for healthcare systems, or maybe payment for healthcare systems, to avoid the stroke, or to avoid them going on dialysis, or avoid the big cardiac surgery. Because you controlled their diabetes, or you controlled their hypertension, or you avoided them going to the wrong care setting. Like, all of those things are like wonderful things from a physician or a clinical or a practical perspective. But unfortunately, incentives are not aligned. And I think incentives for these type of things could make huge impacts, because then investments can go into those areas. So I think, to sort of, close this out, I think we have a couple minutes left, is that I think incentives need to be aligned. I think resources need to be put into this before we get to the rest of that iceberg, as Stephen was saying, and understanding what else we could do, what else, healthcare systems, whether it's healthcare systems, research organizations, drug companies, or whatever else could really do. That's really what it is. I think in the end of the day is we need the resources to capture the right data and develop the right algorithms and have the proper support to put them in the right context. Maybe some closing remarks from either of you guys.
I completely agree with you, and John. All I can say is that there is definitely a significant value that AI and the data-driven decision making is going to bring to the healthcare value chain in the coming years. We're already seeing that today in certain areas, and then we continue to see that, especially to enhance the life of a patient and the time of a healthcare professional. So those are the ultimate benefactors should be the benefactors of the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's complicated issue whenever they talk about healthcare. So I'm an optimist. I always think about, although currently the financial incentive doesn't sound very aligned with a lot of AI algorithm. For example, you avoid patient come to the hospital, you reduce biopsy, reduce surgery. It's a bad thing. But I always believe why we are in healthcare for. Healthcare for is for patients. I always think about and patients, the trend, people hate it, but patients more and more become smart consumer with this AI help. Mm-hmm. And I always think about whatever is good for your consumer is good for your business at end of the day. So I'm very optimistic if AI is very successful and the regulation policy will change such that financial incentive will be aligned. I'm not quite sure whether the physician will really embrace AI, but I can assure that they will be replaced by a physician who knows AI going forward. Okay, so you like it, don't you better know it.
Yeah, or be more comfortable with AI.
That's right.
I think the future of healthcare is that we're going to have physician and healthcare shortages in the future. So maybe it's not about replacing; it's about sort of augmenting.
As I told you, you're solving a manpower problem.
Yep.
We people look at it negatively. I think it's very positively.
Yeah.
Physicians should spend more time with patients.
Yep. And I think it's about working smarter, not working harder, or at least spending more time with your patients to why you went to medical school or nursing school or whatever the care may be, wherever case may be. We didn't do it to spend it with the computer, that's for sure. I would have stayed as a software developer at that point.
You probably make more money this way. Anyway.
With that, I think we can definitely close the session and maybe hand it back to Trika.
That's it for today's general session. Before the other sessions begin, we will be hosting our town halls, which are open Zoom discussions around cutting-edge topics. Today's are titled, "Can AI Help Lessen Burnout in Clinicians?" and "Developing Clinician Trust in AI Tools." If you'd like to join one of these sessions and talk about the subject, use the link in the swap card session and turn your camera on. The session will be directed by 2 moderators and everyone is welcome. If you aren't crazy about Zoom discussions, we'll see you at our first talks beginning soon. Enjoy!